you can watch it here. So we're on 4-4. I forgot to do the record the homework questions or the little review. So if you needed help with that, you got to see me outside, but here's the lesson. So unit 4.4 is using congruent triangles. You see we've got 2 proofs on this page, so we're kind of building up to a proof. And I really only have 1 piece of new information to show you today. Before I show you that new piece of information, let's talk about what this means. What does it mean if I tell you that these 2 triangles are congruent? Triangle PQT is congruent to WXM. What does that mean? What does that mean? Or if you don't know what it means, what do we know? If we know these 2 triangles are congruent, what do we know?
It means those 2 triangles are congruent.
We know the triangles are congruent. I heard someone trying to say a little bit more. What else did I hear?
Some sides are congruent.
The sides are congruent, and then what else is congruent?
Some angles.
The angles.
All of the angles and all of the sides, actually. So I'm going to write all corresponding angles and all corresponding sides are congruent. So as Allie said, she's like, okay, I know this statement means that the triangles are congruent, but if we dive a little deeper, it means that all of their sides and all their angles that match up are congruent as well. If you want to, you can always draw a picture of this. So I can draw that, I can copy and paste it. So now I've got 2 triangles, I'll put him over here. And then you can label them if you want, P, Q, T, and W, X, M. Or we can just look at the statement, but I want to now know what are all my angles that are congruent. Who can give me a pair of congruent angles?
P and W.
P and W, good, Maddie. Angle P is congruent to angle W. What's another set of angles that's congruent?
Q and X.
Q and X, very good. And then what's the third angle set that's congruent?
M and T.
M and T, very good. I've got a lot of people that help me on that, thank you. I'm gonna keep T and then M to keep everything kind of in order, so all of one triangle's in one column, all of one triangle's in another column. Awesome, so we just knew the first angles were congruent, the second angles were congruent, and then the third ones were congruent. Awesome. Now we can do the same idea with the sides. So now I wanna list all the sides that are congruent. Who can give me a set of sides that are congruent?
P, Q, and WX.
Very good, Griffin. P, Q, and WX. So again, just keep the angles that are congruent in the same order and then match them up. Don't forget your little hats on your congruent mark. Who can give me another set of congruent sides?
QT and XM.
Very good. QT and XM. Very good, Maddie. And then what's the last one? What's the last set of congruent sides?
PT and WM.
PT and WM. I love how careful you were with the order of those. Very good, Griffin. WM. All right, so we knew that. We've seen congruent signs, we've seen triangles, we've matched up angles, we've matched up sides before. That should have been a review. What we're learning today is if I give you this congruent statement, then we can say that any of the pieces are congruent. So for example, I can say P and W are congruent. I could say QT is congruent to XM. And the reason I get to say that is definition. It's by the definition of congruent triangles. So if I know that the triangles are congruent, then I can say any piece is congruent to another piece that, you know, go together, correspond by the definition of congruent triangles. I abbreviate that just saying DEF, congruent sign, triangle sign. The reason we say that is it's the meaning of a word is its definition. So if we ever are like, okay, well, that's just like what it means to be congruent, then that's why we say definition of. That's the same reason why we said definition of perpendicular lines, definition of a midpoint. That's just like what that means. This also works with segments or sides. So I just use an example of P and W, which were angles, but this works for any piece, sides, angles, whatever of a triangle. So that's the only new thing I'm teaching you. The other thing that goes with it is just another way to say definition of congruent triangles. So all of us kind of have a thing in your brain and we like certain things more than we like others, or you can remember something more than you can remember something else. So I personally like definition of congruent triangles, but another way you could say it if that just like doesn't stick in your brain is this statement. It says corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. It's going to take me a minute to write it out. I'm going to zoom in so I can write kind of nice, and then I'll zoom out so you can see it. As I write it, I'll repeat it. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Some of you might think, oh no, Ms. White, that just took you way too long to write. I'm for sure not going to do that. You can abbreviate it. Some teachers let you abbreviate it with like the first letters of the names, but I don't like that because I can't remember what it means. So I want us to remember what this means. So if we're going to abbreviate it, we can use corresponding parts, congruent, triangles, congruent. That's as short as it can get. So I know that that's not super short. If you want something shorter, then remember definition of congruent triangles. But those mean the same thing. You can use them interchangeably, whatever works for you. All right, that's all the new stuff we're learning was just this piece. And this is really just the last part of the proof. All of the proofs that we're gonna do, you can do all of it except for that last line. The last line is what we're just now learning. You could have done that before you came to class today. So let's do it. Let's work through these proofs. Okay, any questions before I go to the proofs? I'm so sorry, I jumped ahead. Questions, comments, concerns? Okay. In this proof, I've got this picture right here, these nice triangles together. I see BA and DA are marked congruent and CA and EA are marked congruent. And then it tells me my proof is C is congruent to E. Word to the wise. This is how we're ending. We always end with what we're proving. So go ahead and write that down in my box for number 5. Even if you know nothing else on this proof, you can at least get that point. Okay, the next thing we do is we start at the beginning and see what the reasons are. So first one says BA is congruent to DA. What's my reason for that?
Given.
Given, very good. And then the next one says CA is congruent to EA. Why do I know that?
Given.
Also given, right? I'm sure most of you have already written it down or are yelling it from your side of the computer, even though I can't hear you. Given, 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 given. Easy. So we know 3 things without even trying yet. Now step 3, we got to try. It says angle CAB is congruent to angle EAD. So let's zoom in and look at that. CAB is right here and EAD is right here. CAB, EAD. That just makes my picture messier, so I'm going to erase it, but you get the gist. Why are those angles congruent?
Vertical angles are congruent.
Very good. Those angles are vertical, and we know vertical angles are congruent. Vertical angles are congruent. Oh, it looks like now we're ready to prove these triangles are congruent. Which shortcut, which postulate do I get to use to prove that these are congruent?
Side angle side.
Side angle side. Very good, Allie. Allie knows we have a side, we have an angle, and we have another side. That angle is in between my sides. Think of it like I've got a side, I've got another side, and the angle is right in between it. So that's why we call it side angle side. Don't forget your little congruent mark after it. We've been able to do that before. We know all those pieces. The last step is what we just learned. You can use either of the 2 highlighted theorems. I don't care, they mean the same thing. If I prove that these triangles are congruent, I can say any of their other pieces are congruent because of definition of congruent triangles or corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. I will always write both because I know that some of you will write each one. You only have to write one of them. So I don't care which one you like. Pick that one, go with it. Questions? Concerns? Awesome. All right, let's do another one. Okay, complete the following proof. Angle 2 is congruent to angle 1. Let's stop everything and label my picture. I'm almost done grading your guys' quizzes, and a lot of us didn't label our picture. So make sure you label your picture, A, so I can give you some partial credit, and B, to show me you know what you're doing and you're not just like blindly picking A, B, C, or D. So label your picture. And then it says 4 and 5 are congruent, so I use 2 congruent marks to show that they're congruent, but it's a different congruence than 1 and 2. And then it says I'm proving BC is congruent to DC. Okay, I have no idea what goes in step 5 yet, but I do know BC is congruent to DC goes at the end. That's my final destination, I guess. That's where I'm headed. All right, so I labeled my picture. I put in my prove in the last statement. Now I'm ready to do my reasons. What's the first reason? Why is angle 2 congruent to angle 1?
Given.
Given. Very good, Maddie. It's given. Why is 1 congruent to angle 3?
Vertical angles are congruent.
Good, Griffin. Vertical angles are congruent. You're killing the vertical angle game today, Griffin. I love it. Vertical angles are congruent. They're across from each other. Oop, before I forget, let me mark angle 3 is congruent. Okay, good. The next step says angle 2 is congruent to angle 3. Why do I know that? Why do I know angle 2 is congruent to angle 3? I'm looking at my picture and I don't see any good reason why 2 and 3 are congruent. So I can't use my picture. It's not vertical. It's not alternate interior or something. So I'm going to look back at my proof. The first 2 steps say angle 2 is congruent to angle 1, and then angle 1 is congruent to angle 3.
Transitive?
Transitive. Very good, Charlie. I can cross out that angle 1, and I get to go directly to 2 and 3 are congruent. Awesome. Don't forget your congruent mark behind transitive property. Okay, then it says 4 and 5 are congruent. Why is that?
Given.
Given again. Very good, Allie. Ooh, and 5's not filled in. Ooh, let's look at the picture. Is there anything I can mark that wasn't already told to me?
That line C is, I guess like congruent, but it's like reflexive property.
Very good. I do need 2 letters to mark this line, so I'm going to call it either AC or CA. It doesn't matter. But you're right. It's congruent to itself for reflexive property. So in the past, we just like drew a little arrow and wrote reflexive off to the side. Now we're going to put it in our proof. Let's write AC is congruent to AC, and we'll call that reflexive property. Oh, I'm ready to call my triangles congruent. Why are they congruent? What's the little theorem I get to use?
ASA.
ASA, very good, Griffin. Griffin knew that he had 2 that were the same and then 1 that was in the middle, and this time it was my 2 angles were on the outside and my side was on the inside. So ASA congruent mark. Since the side's in the middle, you don't get to use AAS. That's not an option here. Nope, nope, nope. And then my last step is what we just learned today and what we just did on the last step before this. As it says at the bottom, most of these proofs end the same way. So you can either call it definition of a congruent or corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Either are correct. So make sure you fill whatever floats your boat into your last box. Okay, and that's it for the notes. Any questions? Okay, I'm gonna stop my share. I'm gonna stop my